and welcome to Sex 101 and Relationships. This podcast is created to empower our success and, of course, our intimate relationships. How romance, romantasy, and smut took over publishing a statistical analysis part 2.
Yes, indeed. So, as we saw in part one and reported by Daniel Paris on Substack, the publishing industry is currently undergoing a massive structural reorganization driven by the overwhelming dominance of romance, romantasy, and explicit fiction. We can see how the modern publishing house has become a merchant of behavior, offering readers a temporary escape from the wasteland of the everyday.
So, Mr. Rick, if this degrading content is so harmful, why has it become so dominant? What economic forces are driving this explosion?
Follow the money. Always follow the money. The smut economy represents one of the most cynical examples of capitalism divorced from any sense of cultural responsibility or human flourishing. It's algorithmic exploitation at scale, and understanding how it works reveals why the publishing industry has abandoned its civilizational role. First, understand the core business model. Smut is incredibly cheap to produce and incredibly profitable to sell. Unlike serious literature, where it requires skilled writing, extensive editing, and patient development, smut can be mass produced using formulaic templates. There are literally guides teaching aspiring writers how to churn out romance, erotica using standard plots, stock characters, and required sexual content at specified intervals. It's an assembly line for degradation. Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing revolutionized this economy. Suddenly, anyone could publish anything with no editorial oversight, no quality control, and no consideration of content appropriateness. The platform is entirely algorithm driven. If it sells, it gets promoted. If it gets promoted, it sells more. A positive feedback loop that rewards exactly the kind of content that generates the strongest compulsive response: sexual stimulation. The algorithms are amoral by design. They don't distinguish between content that elevates and content that degrades. They measure only engagement: clicks, purchases, reading speed, and completion rates. And guess what drives engagement most powerfully? Novelty and stimulation of base appetites. The algorithm doesn't care if content makes readers better people or worse. It cares about whether they keep clicking. This creates perverse incentives. Writers who want to make money quickly learn that smut outsells serious fiction by orders of magnitude. A competently written romance with explicit sexual content can generate six figures in revenue with minimal marketing, while a brilliant literary novel might struggle to find 1,000 readers. The market signal is clear: degradation pays better than elevation. The subscription model intensifies this. Kindle Unlimited pays authors based on pages read, creating an incentive for long books with rapid pacing that keeps readers binge reading. The most effective way to achieve this? Serial romance erotica with cliffhangers and regular sexual content. Readers develop compulsive consumption patterns similar to pornography addiction, and authors profit from this compulsion. Beyond this, behind the scenes, there are content farms where writers churn out smut using AI assistants and templates. The goal isn't literary merit, it's volume and algorithm optimization. Title, cover, and description are engineered for maximum click through. Content is formulaic enough to write quickly, but stimulating enough to keep readers engaged. Quality is irrelevant, and only sales velocity matters. The psychological exploitation is deliberate. Romance erotica particularly targets women, offering a fantasy escape from unsatisfying real relationships. The formula is predictable. Ordinary woman meets impossibly attractive, wealthy, sexually skilled man who develops and becomes obsessed with her despite her ordinariness. After minimal character development and often problematic power dynamics, they engage in graphic sexual encounters that are physically implausible and emotionally shallow. The series structure ensures readers become invested in characters and continue purchasing. This isn't art, it's engineered addiction. The content is designed to trigger dopamine responses that create compulsive consumption. The business model depends on readers becoming habitual consumers, purchasing new releases immediately, and binge reading entire series. It's the same psychology that casinos use: variable rewards, escalating stakes, and exploitation of compulsive tendencies. Compare this with how serious publishers traditionally operated. Editors at houses like Scribner's or Knopf saw their role as discovering and developing talent, publishing important books that might not be immediately profitable, and maintaining standards that honored both craft and cultural contribution. They understood that publishing was a long-term investment in civilization, not just quarterly profits. The economic shift from this model to the current smut economy reflects a broader cultural transformation. We've moved from stakeholder capitalism, where businesses recognize responsibilities to employees, communities, and culture, to shareholder capitalism, where maximizing profit is the sole legitimate goal. Publishers that once saw themselves as cultural stewards now answer only to corporate parents demanding quarterly growth. Consolidation of publishing into a few massive conglomerates accelerated this. When Penguin Random House controls a vast portion of the market, decisions are made at corporate headquarters by executives focused on profit margins, not by editors who love literature and understand cultural formation. The accountants have displaced the curators. Meanwhile, independent authors face brutal market realities. If you want to make a living writing, Smut offers the most reliable path. Serious literary fiction might win awards, but it rarely pays the mortgage. The economic incentives push talented writers toward degrading content, creating a brain drain from serious literature to commercial exploitation. The advertising ecosystem reinforces this. Amazon and other retailers profit from whatever sells, so they're incentivized to promote content that generates maximum revenue regardless of quality or cultural impact. Their recommendation algorithms push readers towards increasingly extreme content because escalation drives engagement. Someone who reads mild romance gets recommended spicier content. Someone who reads that gets recommended darker content. The algorithm is trained to escalate because escalation increases purchase frequency. Social media amplifies this further. BookTok and Bookstagram communities often celebrate smut reading as liberation and empowerment, while serious literature is dismissed as pretentious or boring. The cultural cachet has inverted. Reading degrading content is framed as rebellious and authentic, while reading serious literature is seen as elitist. This cultural shift both reflects and reinforces the economic incentives. The broader economic context matters too. In an economy where many people are stressed, overworked, and relationally isolated, escapist fantasy offers temporary relief. Smut provides a quick dopamine hit that temporarily masks deeper dissatisfaction. Publishers profit from people's pain, offering addictive content rather than formative literature that might actually help readers develop the capacity for the relationships they crave. From a Judeo-Christian perspective, this is idolatry, making an idol of profit and serving it regardless of human cost. The prophet Amos thundered against those who trample on the needy and bring the poor of the land to an end by their exploitative economic practices. The same prophetic critique applies to publishers who profit from content that damages people's capacity for flourishing. They're making money by making people worse. The Talmudic tradition teaches that business ethics aren't separate from spiritual obligations. The way you make money matters as much as how much you make. A business that profits by damaging others is engaged in a form of theft, stealing from people's potential for flourishing. By this standard, the smut economy is systemically stealing from readers' capacity for genuine intimacy and meaningful relationships. Jesus confronted the money changers in the temple because they had turned a sacred space into a marketplace. The modern publishing industry has done something similar, turning the sacred space of reading, which historically formed souls and transmitted wisdom, into a marketplace for degradation. Where once stood cultural stewards, now sit algorithm optimizers and profit maximizers. The economic forces are powerful, but they're not inevitable. Publishers could choose differently. Platforms could implement ethical standards. Readers could demand better. But this requires recovering the understanding that publishing isn't just commerce, it's cultural formation. What we publish matters because what people read shapes who they become. In conclusion, the economic incentives driving smut production represent a complete inversion of publishing's traditional role. Profit maximization has replaced cultural stewardship, which raises urgent questions about what this means for actual relationships and communities.
Mr. Mick, we talk about brain science and economics, and but what about real world impact? Can we actually trace declining publishing quality of specific relationship problems or people are experiencing?
This is where theory meets heartbreaking reality. The landscape has changed dramatically over the past few decades, and while multiple factors contribute, the degradation of cultural content, particularly what people read, plays a significant role that's often overlooked. Start with the loneliness epidemic. Researchers like Dr. Julian Holt Lundstad have documented that loneliness and social isolation have reached our crisis levels, with health impacts equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes daily. But here's what's fascinating: we have more communication, technology, and more access to people than ever before. The problem isn't lack of contact, it's lack of capacity for genuine intimacy. When your imagination has been formed by content that presents relationships as primarily sexual transactions, you lack the conceptual framework for building intimacy through communication, shared values, and gradual vulnerability. You've been trained to evaluate potential partners based on physical attraction and sexual chemistry rather than character compatibility and shared life vision. The result? Serial, superficial connections that never develop depth. The marriage statistics tell a sobering story. While divorce rates have stabilized somewhat, marriage rates have plummeted. Young people are delaying or avoiding marriage entirely, often because they feel unprepared or because they've witnessed so much relational failure. But here's the question: unprepared in what sense? They have unprecedented access to information about sex and relationships. What they lack is formation in the virtues required for lasting commitment. Consider what Paul wrote to the Corinthians about love. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. This is love as virtue, as cultivated capacity, as practiced skill. It requires patience, kindness, humility, and endurance, exactly the qualities that degrading content actively works against. Smut trains readers in the opposite direction. It presents love as instant attraction, overwhelming passion, and sexual intensity. It celebrates selfishness. He's obsessed with me, encourages envy, comparing real partners to fantasy ideals, and promotes impatience. If it's not immediately perfect, move on. The implicit message is that real love should feel like the opening chapters of a romance novel: effortless, intense, and focused entirely on your satisfaction. The hookup culture that dominates contemporary dating flows directly from this mindset. If relationships are primarily about sexual gratification and emotional intensity, why commit? Just sample widely until you find someone who provides maximum satisfaction. This approach treats people as interchangeable consumer goods, and the psychological damage is measurable. Dr. Lisa Wade's research on hookup culture on college campuses reveals widespread emotional distress, particularly among women. Students reported feeling compelled to engage in casual sex they didn't want, struggling to form meaningful relationships, and experiencing confusion about how to transition from casual to committed relationships. They had been culturally formed for consumption, not commitment. The therapeutic community is overwhelmed with relationship dysfunction. Therapists report that clients increasingly struggle with basic relationship skills: communicating needs, managing conflict, tolerating imperfection, and maintaining commitment through difficulty. These aren't complicated skills, but they require formation. They're learned through example, practice, and narrative models that show what healthy relationships look like. Where historically did people get these models? From family, yes, but also from literature. When you read about Elizabeth and Darcy working through their pride and prejudice, you're seeing a model for how real growth enables genuine connection. When you read about Ruth's loyalty and Boaz's integrity, you're seeing covenant love in action. When you read the parables of Jesus, you're learning about love as sacrifice, forgiveness, and grace. Modern smut provides no such models. Characters are typically perfect for or perfectly flawed in supposedly attractive ways. Conflicts are minimal and quickly resolved through passionate sex. There's no realistic portrayal of the ordinary work required for lasting relationship. The boring conversations about finances, the tedious compromises about housework, the difficult forgiveness after real hurts, the patient endurance through illness or depression. The result is a generation utterly unprepared for a real relationship. They've been formed by content that presents fantasy, and they're shocked when reality doesn't cooperate. Real partners have flaws. Real sexual chemistry fluctuates. Real commitments requires work. Real love requires sacrifice. None of this appears in smut, so readers enter relationships with completely unrealistic expectations. The pornography research provides the clearest evidence of how degrading content damages relationship capacity. Studies consistently show that regular pornography users report decreased relationship satisfaction, increased infidelity, and higher divorce rates. The mechanism is straightforward. Pornography trains users to respond sexually to novel stimuli and visual perfection, while real partners are familiar and physically imperfect. The comparison dooms real relationships. The same pattern emerges with smut consumption. Women who regularly consume romance erotica often report that real partners seem boring or inadequate. They've been trained to expect partners who are impossibly wealthy, devastatingly attractive, sexually insatiable, and utterly focused on their pleasure. Real men who have normal jobs, normal appearance, normal sex drives, and their own needs can't compete. This isn't just individual dysfunction, it's a civilizational crisis. The family unit is the fundamental building block of society. When people lack the capacity for forming and maintaining families, everything else deteriorates. Children need stable families. Communities need committed couples. Civilization requires people capable of long term thinking and sacrificial commitment. All of this depends on people being formed for relationships rather than consumption. The early church understood this. The apostolic teaching consistently emphasized family formation and relational virtue. The household codes in Ephesians and Colossians provided frameworks for relationships characterized by mutual submission, sacrificial love, and covenant commitment. These weren't arbitrary rules, they were formations for civilizational flourishing. Jewish tradition emphasizes this even more strongly. The family is the center of religious life. The Sabbath is celebrated at home. Children are taught through family rituals. Marriage is understood as holy covenant, not merely romantic preference. This entire framework assumes people are capable of commitment, sacrifice, and long term thinking, all capacities that require formation. What we're seeing now is the fruit of several generations formed by degrading content rather than wisdom literature. The capacity for commitment has atrophied. The ability to delay gratification has weakened. The willingness to sacrifice for others has diminished. And we wonder why relationships fail, while loneliness increases, and why mental health deteriorates. Augustine wrote in City of God about two cities: the city of man, built on self love, and the city of God, built on love of God and neighbor. The smut economy is systemically forming people for the city of man. It trains self love, self gratification, and self focus. It undermines exactly the other oriented love required for healthy relationships and functioning communities. The research on attachment theory provides additional insight. Dr. Sue Johnson's work on emotionally focused therapy shows that secure attachment, the foundation for healthy adult relationships, requires consistent emotional availability, responsiveness, and engagement. But how do you develop these capacities if you've been formed by content that presents relationships as primarily about your own gratification? The sexual revolution promised liberation but delivered isolation. By severing sex from commitment, we didn't free people from authentic connection. We trained them for shallow consumption. By removing moral frameworks without replacing them with anything coherent, we didn't empower people to choose wisely. We left them confused and rudderless. The publishing industry's embrace of smut accelerated this cultural shift, providing the content that trains people in exactly the wrong direction. In conclusion, the human cost of degraded publishing is measurable in loneliness, divorce, dysfunction, and the widespread inability to form the relationships that make life meaningful, which leads us to ask whether recovery is possible.
So, Mr. Mick, this is all pretty bleak. Is there any hope? Can people who've been formed by degrading content recover the capacity for healthy relationships? And can publishing redeem itself?
Yes, and this is where the Christian message becomes deeply relevant. Recovery is possible because humans are not determined machines, but free beings capable of transformation. The same neuroplasticity that allows degrading content to damage us also allows formative content to heal us. Redemption is real, and it often begins with what we choose to read. The biblical narrative is fundamentally a story of recovery and redemption. Consider the Apostle Paul, who went from persecuting Christians to becoming Christianity's greatest evangelist, or Peter, who denied Christ 3 times but was restored and became the rock on which the church was built, or the woman caught in adultery, whom Jesus neither condemned nor left unchanged. Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more. The pattern is consistent. God meets people where they are, but doesn't leave them there. The same applies to recovering from the deformation caused by degrading content. You're not trapped by your past consumption. Your brain can be rewired. Your desires can be reordered. Your capacity for genuine intimacy can be developed. But this requires intentional formation in the opposite direction, replacing degrading content with elevating literature, practicing virtue rather than vice, and dwelling on what is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, and commendable. Augustine's Confessions provides the classic testimony of recovery through reading. His famous prayer, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you," describes the existential longing that drove his pursuit of pleasure, which left him empty. His transformation began when he heard a child's voice saying, "Take up and read," leading him to open scripture. What he read convinced and converted him. The same text that had previously seemed dull now came alive because he was finally ready to be formed by it. The practice of Lectio Divina offers a model for formative reading. This isn't casual entertainment consumption. It's deep meditative engagement with text that allows it to shape you. You read slowly, reflectively, prayerfully. You let the text question you before you question it. You allow it to expose your heart and reform your desires. This kind of reading is fundamentally different from binge consuming smut. From those recovering from pornography addiction or smut consumption, the 12-step model offers relevant wisdom. Recovery begins with admitting powerlessness and the need for help beyond yourself. It requires ruthless honesty about the damage you've done to yourself and others. It involves making amends where possible, and it requires ongoing vigilance and community support. But recovery also requires replacement, not just removal. It's not enough to stop consuming degrading content. You must replace it with formative content. This is where great literature becomes medicine. When you immerse yourself in stories that present virtue, model healthy relationships, and cultivate moral imagination, you're retraining your neural networks in the right direction. Start with scripture. The biblical narrative provides the ultimate framework for understanding love, relationships, sacrifice, and covenant. Paul's teaching on love in 1 Corinthians 13 isn't just beautiful poetry, it's a program for relationship formation. The Psalms provide language for processing emotions healthily. The Gospels present Jesus as the ultimate model of sacrificial love. The wisdom literature offers practical guidance for navigating relationships. Then add the great tradition of Christian literature. Augustine's Confessions and C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity provide intellectual frameworks for understanding desire and virtue. Dante's Divine Comedy offers a vision of rightly ordered love. Dostoevsky's novels explore moral complexity and redemption with unmatched psychological depth. These aren't entertainment, they're formation. Don't neglect serious secular literature either. Jane Austen's novels teach discernment in relationships. George Eliot's Middlemarch explores how character develops through choices over time. Tolstoy's Anna Karenina shows both healthy and destructive relationship patterns. These works form moral imagination without being explicitly Christian because they're rooted in the same tradition of human flourishing. Then practical matters steps also. Delete the apps that facilitate degrading content consumption. Unsubscribe from promotional emails for smut. Join book clubs focused on serious literature. Set reading goals that prioritize formative over consumptive reading. Treat reading as formation, not just entertainment. But personal recovery alone isn't enough. We need institutional recovery too. Publishing must recover its sense of cultural responsibility. This doesn't require government censorship or moralistic crusades. It requires publishers choosing to ask, should we publish this? Not just, will this sell? Some publishers are attempting this. Plow Publishing focuses on books that challenge materialism and consumerism. Ignatius Press publishes serious Catholic literature. New Growth Press specializes in resources that integrate psychology and Christian faith. These houses operate on different principles rather than the smut economy. They see publishing as a vocation, not just profit maximization. The Christian publishing industry could lead discovery and recovery, but often it doesn't. Too many Christian publishers have embraced the same market-driven approach as secular publishers, just with Christian branding. They publish celebrity memoirs and feel-good devotionals that require nothing of readers, rather than serious theology and formative literature that challenges and transforms. What would a recovered publishing industry look like? It would balance commercial viability with cultural contribution. It would invest in serious literature even when immediate profitability isn't guaranteed. It would maintain editorial standards that distinguish quality from dreck. It would recognize that publishers shape civilization and take that responsibility seriously. This recovery requires recovering the wisdom tradition's understanding of reading as formation, the Talmudic model of intensive textual engagement, the medieval practice of lectio divina, and the Protestant emphasis on scripture reading. All these traditions understood that reading shapes souls. We need to recover this understanding in an age of content consumption. Christians and church faith communities have a role here. Imagine churches that taught people to read deeply rather than just encouraging them to read at all. Imagine small groups that engage serious literature together, discussing not just Christian books, but the great tradition of Western literature that forms moral imagination. Imagine pastors who recommended Dostoevsky alongside devotional books. The recovery of individual readers, of publishing integrity, and of cultural wisdom about formation through reading must proceed together. Individual readers choosing better content creates market demand. Publishers responding to this demand with quality literature provide the content people need. Communities supporting serious reading create the cultural environment where this flourishes. The Apostle Paul's teaching about transformation is relevant. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. The renewal of the mind requires attention to what forms the mind. You cannot be transformed while consuming content that conforms you to the world's degraded view of sexuality, relationships, and human dignity. Recovery is possible because God offers redemption. Neuroplasticity allows rewiring, and human agency enables choice. You can choose differently. You can read better. You can be formed rather than deformed. The damage isn't permanent, but recovery requires intentionality, community support, and replacement of degrading content with elevating literature. In conclusion, both individual readers and the publishing industry can recover the proper roles and cultural formation, but this requires recovering the ancient wisdom that what we read shapes who we become and how we love.
Mr. Mick, as we wind down at the end of the episode, what is a practical response? What should people actually do both individually and collectively to resist the smart economy and recover a healthy formation through breathing?
Awareness without action changes nothing. We need a cultural resistance movement, people who intentionally resist the smut economy and choose formative literature, not from prudishness, but from wisdom about human flourishing. Start with a personal inventory. What are you actually reading? Not what you wish you read or what you think you should read, but what you actually consume. If you're honest, is it forming you toward virtue or vice, toward healthy relationships or fantasy consumption, toward moral depth or shallow stimulation? The truth will set you free, but first it might make you uncomfortable. For those who've been consuming smut, the first step is admission. This content is harming me. It's not innocent entertainment. It's forming my imagination in destructive directions. It's damaging my capacity for real intimacy. This admission isn't self-flagellation. It's an honest reckoning that enables change. The comes then practical action. Delete the apps. Unsubscribe from email lists. Tell Amazon's algorithm to stop recommending smut. This might sound simple, but it's spiritually significant. Jesus was serious about removing stumbling blocks. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. He wasn't commanding literal self-mutilation. He was emphasizing that avoiding temptation requires radical action. Replace consumption with formation. Create a reading plan focused on great literature. Start with scripture. Commit to reading the Gospels, then Paul's letters, then the wisdom literature. Join a Bible study that actually engages the text deeply rather than just sharing feelings about isolated verses. Then add the classics. Read Austen and Eliot. Read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. Read Lewis and Chesterton. Read thoughtfully, slowly, reflectively. Don't binge read for entertainment. Engage for formation. Ask how the text challenges you, what virtues it displays, and how it shapes your understanding of love and relationships. Join or form a book club focused on serious literature. Reading community provides accountability, deepens understanding, and creates a cultural alternative to the smut economy. When you discuss Middlemarch with others, you're not just analyzing literature, you're practicing the kind of deep conversation and perspective taking that forms you for real relationships. Support publishers who prioritize cultural contribution over profit maximization. Buy books from houses that maintain standards. When you find a publisher producing quality literature, buy their books and recommend them to others. Market signals matter. Publishers respond to what sells. Parents face a particular responsibility. You're forming the next generation's imagination. What are your children reading? The young adult literature market is saturated with degrading content marketed to teenagers. Don't let algorithm recommendations and peer pressure determine what forms your children. Curate their reading intentionally, providing literature that forms virtue and healthy views of relationships. This doesn't mean only Christian books. Some explicitly Christian fiction is sentimental dreck, while some secular literature is profoundly formative. The Chronicles of Narnia and The Lord of the Rings are superior to most contemporary Christian fiction precisely because they trust the story to convey truth rather than hitting readers over the head with messages. Churches must recover their formative role. Pastors should teach congregations to read well, not just to read the Bible, but to engage the great tradition of Christian and Western literature. Imagine churches that discuss Dante or Augustine alongside contemporary devotional books. Imagine small groups that engage the brothers Karamazov as spiritual formation rather than just reading the latest Christian bestseller. Christian schools and homeschools should prioritize the classical tradition. In conclusion, the classical education movement understands that formation happens through engagement with the best that has been thought and written. Latin, Greek, the great books, the wisdom tradition. This isn't elitism, it's formation for human flourishing.
Mr. Meg, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Romance, romantasy, and increasingly bold storytelling have not just entered publishing, they have dominated it, reshaping the industry's economic and cultural landscape. Statistical trends that reveal that romance consistently accounts for one of the largest shares of book sales worldwide. So, Mr. Meg, would you like to plug in something?
I appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. That's join with me on LinkedIn. G. Mick, the Doctor of Digital Smith, PhD. Listen to the Doctor of Digital podcast. Pick up a couple of volumes I have on Amazon. Burning America and On Track, Ian Hunter.
Yes, people, please do support Mr. Meg, the Doctor of Digital, and please support our other podcasts, Music 101, Love Letters, Mental Health 101, as well as Sex 101, wherever you listen to your podcast. So, Mr. Meg, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, day is full.
Body count, people. See you soon.